it's interesting because it takes a collaboration of a different kind of team than a traditional, even a traditional animated film. Much more technology heavy, and it's required artists to learn how to program and programmers to learn more about art, which I think is exciting.
It's really, really unique. I've never seen something like that. But the amount of work, I mean, I was like watching that, and I'm like, it's not just one shot that he has to compose, it's an entire world. It's a question for all of you. The difficulties, the work, from the concept to the film itself, it seems to me unimaginable because I'm lazy. So, but it's some amount of work. It's like, tell us about how much it is and how much work that this kind of movies imply. Start with you, Elliott.
Sure, it is highly technical. It's there's similarities to traditional filmmaking. We start looking at the stories of the ancient Incan culture and history, and people like Pachacuti, and then we get into the highly technical side where we do this very extensive capture of the location, and it's very tedious and sort of painstaking. But then we bring it back to the story again once we have our model, and we start sort of plotting a flight path around where we're going to take you using the positron chair as a virtual reality viewer. And then you have to add in things like motion encoding, scent programming, and all the fine tuning of how you move people but not too much so they don't get sick and things like this. And it all sorts of comes together in the end, but it's a very new type of filmmaking process and very exciting.
Yeah, I would say the process for an animated VR film, like How to Train Your Dragon, it's really interesting because it just involves so much of the intersection of both software, technology, programming, and artistry, right? And so, and even though this is a purely narrative piece, you're working with a game engine that's used traditionally for making video games. So a lot of it is being invented along the way, right? There's a lot of things. That project was made 3 years ago, but the techniques involve everything from bringing in assets that were meant for very high resolution feature films that you cannot play back at 60 frames a second in VR, and figuring out how to downscale that to creating other characters and character animation in there. And if anyone here has ever done animation, you know how much work that can become. So it's interesting because it takes a collaboration of a different kind of team than a traditional, even a traditional animated film. Much more technology heavy, and it's required artists to learn how to program and programmers to learn more about art, which I think is exciting.
Such a crazy work, such a difficult work. It's so much time, because I suppose it takes years to from day one to the finished movie. And a question now: the film is finished. How to distribute it? How to show it to an audience? It is the most important question in terms of XR and VR and this kind of project. So what's the answer?
So this is a very interesting question. Anybody who's been working in the space for the last, since 2014 or so when it really started, most of these experiences have been financed, for tentpole events like festivals like this with marketing dollars from generous patrons like Intel and Meta and so forth. What we've done at Virtual Worlds is really create this business model where we've attached these positron XR cinemas to existing museum exhibitions. So for example, you would go buy a ticket to see the Incan Empire's golden artifacts at the Louvre. And using this sort of exit at the gift shop model, we would have a positron theater at the end of the exhibition. And that built-in traffic with the museum exhibitions has worked really well for us. The exhibitions see millions of visitors. We, in turn, with the virtual reality experiences, have made millions of dollars selling tickets. And so, to my knowledge, it's one of the first self-sustaining business models in virtual reality. We've done it 4 times now, and we sort of have the business use case to carry this into the future.
Cool. I'll obviously speak more generically about this because this is the heart of what we want to do at Positron, is find ways to distribute content with 2 main objectives. One is for work to be seen by as many audiences as possible without compromising quality. I love what I heard you say earlier, or at the earlier panel, like even if 2 people see it, You want it to be perfect. You don't want it to have that vision. And so that's sometimes harder to do if people are watching, and I'm not knocking having a Quest at home, but you're not going to get necessarily the same kind of sound that was intended by the director. And so how to do that. So one is getting it to as wide an audience as possible with that highest level of quality. And then two, really having a financial model that ultimately doesn't depend on marketing dollars, on sponsors, on just purely art grants. Those are great short-term ways to get distribution finance, but in the long term, for creators to continue to make this content and audience to discover it, it has to be repeatable. So I'm really excited about Elliott's project and how that has now proven itself to become millions of dollars in revenue of just, last 7 months in ticket sales for his film. So I think that, what's been challenging too is figuring out for Positron too, how do we make the model work to scale this, get this into more places, get the chairs, into locations, and then also work with artists and filmmakers to make that as accessible as possible with our software SDK, with programs that let them not just get a film on the chair, but also be able to get into venues and locations where we can help distribute that and make it a both hopefully artistic and commercial success.
Oh, just to continue on that,
Sure.
are you? Can we imagine one day that in every multiplexes in the world there will be one Positron theater?
I hope so.
Are you working with exhibitors? Do they see you as the future or as competitors?
I think the theaters definitely are interested, right? I think they're trying to figure it out. Obviously, with the pandemic, a lot of movie theaters chains are not necessarily in great shape. We all know how much it's been affected, right? But a lot of them, I would say, some of the more forward, innovative theaters are reimagining it. So we have some Positron XR cinemas in 2 theaters now. One is coming up in Yosemite Cinema. The other one was installed at a theater in Texas. So some of those conversations are beginning, but I don't think it needs to be necessarily limited to the traditional movie theaters. I think traditional cinema will continue to flourish and exist. We'll continue to go see 2D movies. So in some cases, it may make sense that there's a Positron XR cinema there, kind of like an IMAX attaches itself to traditionals. But I think these kind of places we're seeing immersive venues, right? Places that offer immersive experiences are popping up all over the world, and audiences are getting excited, whether it's places like Illuminarium or the Van Gogh exhibits or these sort of places that use projection mapping. There's a super high interest in finding these things that go beyond a 2D screen, and I think that those are sort of the locations we're going to look to for continuing to expand the Positron network.